This presentation summarizes the Office of Council Services 2015 report titled The Status of the City's Finances. Each year, the Office of Council Services prepares this report to help council members during the city's annual budget cycle. It covers historical and comparative overviews of city financial trends and details the status of prior operating and capital budgets. This presentation summarizes the three main sections of the report. First, we review city budget trends, including special focus sections. Second, we review operating budget lapses and revenue assumptions. And finally, we look at capital budget lapses and adjustments. We start with budget trends. This section provides a brief summary of the city's budget and financial status, as reflected in certain key statistics, and compares the city with other jurisdictions. It is intended to provide a historical and comparative perspective that may be useful for evaluating the fiscal year 2016 proposed city budget. The special focus section highlights budget and financial issues that are more topical. The following 7 slides will cover overtime expenditures, grants and aid spending, the size of the city budget, net assets of the city, debt, property taxes, and budgeted fund balances versus actual spending. Overtime costs have increased by $1.6 million over 5 years, but the costs have dropped in the most recent year. Overtime costs made up approximately 7.5% of executive branch salary costs in fiscal year 2014. Over the past 5 years, overtime cost increases have remained below the rates of inflation both locally and within the United States. From 2010 to 2014, overtime costs increased 3.4% compared to 5.4% for all salary costs over the same time period. The Grants and Aid Fund was created to be used by the city to award grants and aid to federal income tax exempt nonprofit organizations that provide services to economically and/or socially disadvantaged populations or provide services for public benefit such as the arts, culture, economic development, or the environment. Each year, the Council is required by the Charter to approve a minimum of 0.5% of the estimated general fund revenues into the Grants and Aid Fund. The first year of the program was fiscal year 2014. In that year, the Office of Special Projects lapsed about $212,000, or 4% of the total appropriation of $5.5 million from the Grants and Aid Fund. While this is a small lapse, only 24% of the appropriated funding was expended by the end of the fiscal year. With nearly $4 million encumbered but not expended, the majority of the funds intended for disbursement by the Council for the purposes of the fund was not used within the fiscal year. Midway through fiscal year 2015, the rate of expenditure appears to be slower than the prior year. While the administration has been able to encumber the vast majority of the appropriation from the Grants and Aid Fund, actual expenditures were at only 2% of the total appropriation for the Office of Special Projects activity. One way to measure the size and level of activity of a government entity is by examining the amount of its spending and taxation. Spending drives tax policy, debt policy, and employment policy. City spending on operations is controlled through the operating budget. In this chart, spending on operations is examined to see how the city and county's spending has grown over time. Over the past 10 years, debt service as a component of the city's spending has been outpacing the increases of other spending components. In contrast, sanitation spending has lagged behind all other spending components. This may be reflective of a shift in major sanitation spending from cash to bonds. Enterprise funds are used to account for certain government activities that are run like businesses and charge fees to offset operating costs. The city has 4 enterprise funds, one for the bus system, one for solid waste, one for housing projects, and one for the sewer system. The significance of an enterprise fund's net asset amount is that it shows the financial position of the activity in the city. The annual change in net assets shows whether the fund financially improved or deteriorated during the subject year. As shown in the chart, the net assets of the city's enterprise funds all experienced gains in fiscal year 2014, led by continued gains in sewer fund collections. While significant, the $81 million gain in sewer fund net assets is not as large as the massive $175 million gain in fiscal year 2012 and is the lowest annual increase since fiscal year 2009. Changes to the bus, housing, and solid waste funds were all positive but relatively marginal in FY 2014. Construction spending is authorized in the capital budget. That expenditure is mostly financed by incurring debt in the form of bonds, notes, and commercial paper. A few years after the capital budget takes effect, repayment of the principal amount of the debt issued to finance the budget begins. Debt service payments are made from the operating budget. The debt service for any particular municipal bond issued by the city is paid over a long period, typically 20 or more years. This chart shows the general bonded debt per county resident in the 4 counties. Issued debt whose debt service payments are to be paid with property tax revenues is called general bonded debt. The trend has been for Honolulu to grow its debt burden higher and faster than the other counties, and it continues to do so. In 2013, Honolulu's $2,950 of issued debt per resident far surpassed that of the other counties. Property taxes remain the city's largest single source of revenue. Property tax revenues are generated by applying tax rates to the assessed value of each parcel of taxable real property. These rates are set annually by the City Council. The chart shows real property taxes for the past 20 years. The lower portion of the data includes industrial, commercial, and hotel property tax revenues. On top of that are the residential tax classes. Property tax revenues are projected to be nearly $100 million higher in fiscal year 2015, with all of the larger tax classes seeing revenue gains. The creation of the residential A class at the rate of $6 per 1,000 of net taxable real property is responsible for the bulk of the residential property tax revenue gains in fiscal year 2015. The general fund is the primary fund from which appropriations are made in the operating budget. It is a recommended budget practice that there be a reserve amount in the general fund to pay for unexpected costs. The city's practice has been to budget practically all of the revenues of the general fund, including the carryover from the prior year, for expenditure each fiscal year, thereby leaving no planned reserve or fund balance. While positive and reasonable balances in the general fund are desirable, wide disparities between budgeted and actual balances in the general fund are not. The city's practice of budgeting the entire amount of general funds is not a generally recommended budget practice and not a practice shared by the neighbor island counties. The next 2 slides cover the second section of the report, Operating Budget Lapses and Revenue Assumptions. This is a comparison of actual versus budgeted expenditures for the executive operating budget. The review covers all of fiscal year 2014. This table highlights some of the major appropriation lapses for fiscal year 2014 by budgeted activity. In the larger report, we include lapses that were both at least $1 million and at least 5% of adjusted appropriations. In the information displayed here, you can see that, percentage-wise, the Department of Community Service had 2 very large appropriation lapses. We reviewed the status as of December 31, 2014, of major general fund revenue assumptions for fiscal year 2015. For the purpose of this summary, we define major revenue assumptions as those that involve an amount exceeding $1 million and concern either new sources to the city or a significant increase or decrease in existing sources. In this table, we have included 5 of the larger revenue sources. As with each section of this presentation, for a more detailed look at this information, please see the full report. The final 2 slides cover the third section of the report, the capital budget lapses and adjustments. This section of the report is a comparison of actual versus budgeted expenditures for the executive capital budget over the 24-month effective appropriation period. The review is based on information from an accounting report from the Department of Budget and Fiscal Services for the period ending June 30th, 2014. This table includes the 6 projects that lapsed $2 million or more and at least 60% of the total project. In fiscal year 2013, the largest appropriation lapse was from the Ko'olauloa Affordable Housing Initiative program, where 100% of the $5.6 million appropriation lapsed. Adjustments either increase or decrease the authorized appropriation for a project. Authority in the budget ordinance for such adjustments include the Project Adjustments Account and related provisos, which allow the unused portion of a project appropriation to be transferred to another project, a proviso relating to limited purpose monies, and a proviso allowing sewer project transfers to protect public health and safety or to meet federal or state requirements. In this table, we have highlighted the major project adjustments for fiscal year 2013. The 2015 report is the 15th annual fiscal report prepared by the Office of Council Services for the Honolulu City Council. We hope that you find the information provided in the report useful during the fiscal year 2016 budget cycle. For a more detailed look at this information, please see the report located on our website.